Ed, we were going to talk to you about SpaceX at one point, today or this week. That's what we've been talking about. And then we see the news that OpenAI could be filing in the coming days. What else can you tell us?
Curious timing.
Is it because of?
Yeah.
Is it because of the lawsuit, or is it because of what SpaceX is doing? Are these? There's a lot of Elon tied up in this.
Yeah. So our source at Bloomberg is saying that it's coming weeks. The Journal had said coming days. And there is a distinction between that in when you're filing. The net is OpenAI being in a position where it could be ready to IPO September. We had been much more firm in our reporting on Anthropic, that Anthropic was looking at October for an IPO, but very much framed in a race, right? So to answer your question, the overhang was the trial. Musk suing Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, and the other co-founder, Greg Brockman. And indeed, Bloomberg Intelligence has written about this in their research, right? Once the jury decided to reject Elon Musk's suit, even though Musk plans to appeal, it removed an overhang on the idea that OpenAI could move forward to a IPO, in part because of the potential financial penalty that Musk was pursuing. That's where we stand.
But still, Ed, the timing, curious for maybe a few more reasons as well. I mean, we have SpaceX also preparing to go public. We have Anthropic. You have to wonder whether all of these firms are kind of rushing to tap into the public markets before the AI momentum slows down.
Yeah, I guess that's an important point. Whenever you have a big IPO, particularly a technology IPO, there always has to be a story behind it, right? Mm-hmm. Our reporting is that SpaceX's S1 could flip public today. Brace. It could be a wild few hours to come. But there's also the issue of is there infinite liquidity in capital markets? If SpaceX is going to do the biggest IPO of all time at a valuation of more than $2 trillion, raise $75 billion, and then do the math on how much of the company they offer, does that take the oxygen out of the room for an OpenAI or an Anthropic, right? If OpenAI and Anthropic both want to go public, towards that September, October timeframe, end of the year, that gives investors a really interesting choice. And part of what we've been reporting over the last 6 months in aggregate is Anthropic has a lot of momentum right now. And the big take overnight is a case study of SoftBank being very concentrated in OpenAI. Yeah. These are all considerations.
I love that story. If you missed that one, check it out on the Bloomberg terminal. Today's big take, as Ed mentioned. Ed, on the Anthropic side of this, does timing matter? Who's first? And because if we think about these two different companies, the way that they're valued and what they offer, is it fair to say that investors will be making a choice of one or the other?
It's very bifurcated in private markets. There are those that stick to OpenAI, right? SoftBank is an interesting example. There are several venture firms and late stage or private growth equity investors, indeed sovereigns, that have exposure to both. The latest reporting from us is that, Natasha and I reported, I think it was last week before, Anthropic is now sort of taking more seriously raising money in the private markets, more than 35 billion at an evaluation between 900 billion and 1 trillion. The reports on what OpenAI's valuation would be in an IPO is 1 trillion. And basically the way that it's put to me, Tim, out here on the left coast or the west coast is you have Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, Meta, XAI, several lanes, but in the market, is there room for all of them? And that conversation comes up quite a lot.
And I mean, you have to wonder also how much money, how much more capital do they really need to raise? Ed, can you tell us a little bit about what are really the stated goals, at least for OpenAI, for what they would do with this new capital that they would raise from an IPO?
Well, they do. The argument that OpenAI, to their credit, has been consistent on is that if they had more compute, users of their technology would not be constrained, right? That's something that's been talked about on social media just in the last 24 hours. But they could also offer more stuff. The concern is different. The concern is that the revenue growths just simply do not keep pace with the spending growth to justify an IPO, right? When you go public, you through the mechanism of the filing, you open that up to the world about your business and the finances of that. And, in the world of tech, profit isn't always important, but investors still want to kind of see what the plan is longer term, the total addressable market, and the road to profit. And so that's more of the calculus with OpenAI specifically.
Well, let's talk about those books, Ed. I mean, it's a private company at this point. It's, we don't know. We don't have full disclosures at this point, but what can you tell us what has been reported when it comes to OpenAI's books? What numbers do we know?
I'm trying to scramble to pull up my notes now, but basically, the revenue run rates in the tens of billions, and the OpenAI's own projections for the coming 12 months through the 2030 is for a lot of growth. But you have to remember that OpenAI is on the hook for also almost $1 trillion of projects around the world, largely relating to infrastructure, where there's a mix of it's committing capital, or a partner is committing capital on its behalf, or it is on the hook to be the lead tenant and lease that capacity, but somebody else has built it. So that's the underlying concern. Revenue in the tens of billions, but the exposure, the committed spending over time being in the hundreds of billions, and that being worrying.
Did I hear you say anything about profit?
Yeah, I just don't think we're anywhere near that, right? How, in the economics of AI, for a company that trains a model and then deploys it through a series of products, it's on a dollar per token basis.
Okay.
Right, that's the study, but your compute costs will directly factor into that.
There are some people out there, Ed, who may be old-fashioned and say maybe a company should wait until it's profitable, at least for a few consecutive quarters to go public. Is that a different era?
Oh, I don't know. As a student of Silicon Valley, and one of the reasons I came here to San Francisco, like the people that back those companies at an early stage, right through to taking them public. Whether it's software or hardware, there's not really that focus. We should not get into this, but it's like I remember the days where people were fixated on whether Uber would have positive EBITDA.
Yeah.
And it's like,
and there are plenty of companies, we should know, there are plenty of companies that do go public that are not yet profitable, and there's definitely investor appetite. No question.
Yeah. The one thing I would say real quick, remember Rivian, right, was the sixth biggest IPO in US history. And that was in 2021. Yeah, here we are, they're still not profitable. So, that's a good indicator.
Who is poised to benefit most from the OpenAI IPO? And I imagine some of the investors in OpenAI right now are some of the ones that are also tied up in these other large companies potentially going public soon.
Well, it's a mix of the strategics, which are other technology companies. I would say to the audience, go and read our reporting, which was linked to the trial between Elon Musk and Sam Altman, again, dismissed by the jury and the judge, but about Microsoft's economic gains from its initial investments in OpenAI. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have somebody like Vinod Khosla of Khosla Ventures, a venture capitalist who wrote one of the first institutional checks into OpenAI at the time that was at issue in that trial, like very early stages where it was a very different beast. And so over time, and then the people themselves, right? Sam Altman has a very curious lack of stake in OpenAI, which you can read about. Greg Brockman has a more sizable stake. The individuals at play as well. That is what's at question here.
Ed, remind us how OpenAI has been changing its business, sort of trimming or more focusing on certain parts of its business ahead of an IPO. I'm thinking about Sora, for example.
Yeah, so Sora was an interesting project. There was a partnership and sort of financial relationship with Disney that was scaled back. Sora being a tool that is a text-to-image tool. So when we talk about generative AI, generative can mean you create something that's in different forms. We're very accustomed to ChatGPT, where the input is text, the prompt is text, and the output is text. In Sora's case, it was image, but it didn't, both on usage and the compute costs and the net results of it didn't really work. So that's part one. The other part, and this is where it pits itself more closely with Anthropic, and based on our recent reporting, Elon Musk's XAI as well, is going after the enterprise customer. Think in the world of finance or healthcare, etc., getting those organizations at scale to use either the underlying model or to use the tool. That has been an area where Anthropic really focused, and it's been a big driver of revenue for growth for them. OpenAI's origin was ChatGPT. Everyday people like you, me, and Emily just using ChatGPT for hours and hours, but they want that enterprise business to kind of outpace it.
Right. I'm very curious if there's going to be any use of ChatGPT, at least on the banking side. They're probably not allowed to do this, but drafting these prospectuses. But that's not my question for you, Ed. My question is, of course, when the paperwork finally comes out, can you sum up like the one or two big questions that you have about this company that will potentially be revealed in this paperwork?
Wait, we're still talking about OpenAI?
Yeah.
Well, so this is the thing, right? So like, there's mechanics to this. What we're talking about is, in the first instance, reports from various media, including Bloomberg News, that they are thinking of filing confidentially. It hasn't even happened yet.
Right.
Then there's a period of time where you don't know what's in it unless you know somebody pretty high up on the inside, until it flips public. That's the moment we're waiting for. Today with SpaceX. SpaceX filed confidentially May 4th, not May 4th. Tim, when was I in Florida for Artemis? The beginning of April.
Yeah, beginning of April.
Yeah, so then that was when we reported, citing sources, the confidential filing. What happens after that is it goes back to the SEC. The SEC makes recommendations for how it could be changed and updated. And at some point, it goes public. And that's when you find out about everything. So I'm not answering your question, Emily, but I think we're probably a little ways off from learning.
Well,
but it's about financials, where they see the addressable market, and then surprises along the way, like the structure of the company,
but
ownership.
I'm really glad you went to SpaceX, and that's where I want to end just in the last minute with you or so. And it's about SpaceX AI, as it now is, versus Anthropic and OpenAI, specifically in the context of OpenAI and a potential IPO. Because SpaceX now has XAI as part of it, does that pull some oxygen / interest from OpenAI and Anthropic?
Yeah, so like one easy answer is like debt. So when SpaceX merged with XAI, the SpaceX part was valued at about $1 trillion, the XAI part 250 billion, so the combined entity 1.25 trillion. But SpaceX also took on XAI to its balance sheet, which would include debt. So then that should be disclosed in the S1 when it gets flipped publicly. There should be something in there about that. It's like also the story. Why is a rocket company who's building constellations of satellite for internet, Starlink, and wants to build data centers in space, acquiring a frontier lab? That should kind of be answered, right, in the document and prospectus, because it will help investors understand it ahead of the IPO.
And there's also the question, Ed, that we don't have time to answer, what it means for Tesla and Tesla shareholders, because that's part of the conversation too.